Hello, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Tawnee Wakefield, and I'm an English teacher at Vista High School. And I'm here with my colleagues. I'll let them introduce themselves.
Hi, my name's Tiffani Templeton, and I'm an English and social science teacher in the Sweetwater Unified High School District.
Hi, I'm Tim Dombrowski. I'm also a social studies teacher in the Sweetwater Union High School District.
And we appreciate you being here today as we discuss the ways in which you can maximize efficacy in your classrooms. There is a plethora of research we'd love to share with you, but we will primarily focus on what we believe to be applicable to your practice. You may always reach out to us via email to inquire about any of the topics we cover here today in more detail. Our emails are there below. All right, so jumping into our focus for today's webinar, we have a question that has been at the forefront of our collaboration. How can culturally relevant teaching improve educational outcomes amongst disparate groups of students? Well, let's start by looking at California. We know that Ladson Billings published work on culturally relevant pedagogy in the 1990s, and California educators have especially advocated for CRT. But looking at the data here, we see vast disparities still exist between our student populations. Even when controlling for socioeconomic status, as you see here, disparities between racial groups remain. According to UCLA, 58% of California's Latino students attend intensely segregated schools, and more than half of the state's Black students are concentrated in just 25 of the state's 1,000 school districts. So housing, busing, tax allocation policy may be out of our jurisdiction. But then what can we do? Why has culturally relevant teaching failed to change the outcomes for our students? Well, we know that correlation does not equal causation. We surmise that it's not the fact that culturally relevant teaching is failing, but that attempts are incomplete, largely due to the lack of a cohesive model for teachers to implement. There are numerous interconnected and deep-rooted obstacles that cause disparities among student groups. And so we're naive to imagine that singular attempts at culturally relevant teaching will be substantially effective. Today, we will discuss 4 of the underlying factors that we believe can systematically target, through culturally relevant teaching to pave the way for meaningful student outcomes. To provide a bit more context on these terms, let us define what we mean by addressing these factors. For socioeconomic inequities, we are referring to the creative construction of enrichment, practice, and resources. In conjunction with a focus on reducing socioeconomic inequities, racial inequities must be targeted through assets-based and community-based empowerment. Social-emotional needs of students must be catered to with caring that extends grades and standards. And finally, by teacher fidelity, we are referring to the dispositions of social justice and expectations for excellence in tandem with critical self-evaluation of teaching practice and the solicitation of feedback from students and community members. In review of the literature on this topic, we found an inextricable link between racial and social class inequities. Lack of rigor within school and opportunities for thriving within the community outside of school compound to block students from educational growth. How culturally relevant teaching can influence this is through a comprehensive model that strengthens the bridge between school and the surrounding community. One example we saw of this was in the model of a City Mentors project, which considered stressors of poverty and racial discrimination to support students in coping academically and emotionally.
All right, thank you, Tawny. We're going to begin first by examining where socioeconomic class meets socio-emotional needs of our students. So in the research of Destin and his team from the University of Texas at Austin, researchers have looked at how growth mindset demonstrates predictors of student outcomes based on socioeconomic status and achievement. This figure shows, despite socioeconomic status, a less fixed or a growth mindset is associated with higher achievement among students of high and low socioeconomic status. So basically, the research has found that despite students' socioeconomic status, when implementing a growth mindset, there are positive outcomes for students across the board. So even students living in more privilege versus students living in more poverty stricken areas, if they have a growth mindset, then they can demonstrate academic achievement and outcomes. For the second research that we are citing here, we need to look at teacher fidelity and dispositions. So with this, we are citing the research of Truscott and Stenhouse, and this focuses on the importance of teacher dispositions in pre-service teachers. So when looking at this research, teachers' cultural competence, that is navigating complexities of student backgrounds, is used to inform dispositions for culturally relevant teaching practices. So teacher dispositions relate closely with growth mindset as well. And these dispositions in tandem together benefit all students. All right, we can go ahead and move on to Tim to take on the next portion.
All right, so what? Why do we care? Most of us here are teachers, not researchers. How does this relate to our practice? Well, the first thing is we've gotten to a point where it's almost a consensus in the educational field that culturally relevant teaching is a particularly useful and helpful way to reach a diverse group of students. The problem lies more with the implementation and the teacher training of establishing it, with culturally relevant being such a complex and sometimes so complex and involving all kinds of different related factors rather than being an instructional strategy. When looking at the research of Powell, there was a specific model that was put forth for teacher development to enable teachers to be a little more effective in establishing culturally relevant teaching. It's focused on 7 steps or 7 criteria. The first was classroom relationships. We're talking student to teacher, teacher to student, student to student, but other than just being relationships for each other, the big factor here is reciprocity. Students really need to know that you are caring as well as them caring about you, that you respect them as well as you expect them to respect you. The next is family collaboration. A little bit of a different dynamic too. We're talking about enabling and facilitating students to work with their family to gain knowledge and to work together, but also establishing really good relationships with families of our students. Often that means having to seek out linguistic resources or cultural resources to see what sort of things families will be able to attend or how we can communicate with them best. Third, is assessment. And when we think of assessment, we usually think of assessment design, but we're talking about 2 very specific focal points of assessment. The first is, yes, assessment design. We need to make sure that we're minimizing the error in our assessments, that there isn't a cultural bias in the assessments that we're creating, or that language isn't getting in the way of assessing things that don't directly relate to language. But also, we need to be consistent and often with our assessments so that we can monitor the progress of our students and reach out to them when they start to dip or struggle, rather than waiting for them to come to us. Fourth is something called curriculum experiences. This is the ways that we deliver our instruction. We need to have diverse ways of getting to our objective. What works for one group of students isn't going to work for another group of students, even with the group is not uniform. So what works for 5 students isn't going to work for another 7 students in our class. So we need to look at the ways that our students learn and tailor our curriculum experiences to them. Pedagogy, we're looking at a lot of student-centered learning rather than teacher-centered learning. So that comes down to creation, project-based, inquiry-based learning. Sixth, we're looking at discourse. So that comes down to some Socratic questioning, driving that critical thought in students. And also, we don't think about this all the time, but having discourse with our staff, fellow teachers, to not only self-reflect, but reflect with other teachers in the profession. And then finally, socio-political consciousness. So we are teachers in the school and in the community. We need to be in the community and fluent in the community. So we need to know what's going on, not only in the classroom, but in the lives and the community of our students. Provide equitable education for our students. One of the big things that we've learned from some of our research, including Hefner, is that students' motivation and desire to learn are one of the most important parts in the learning. So it's a give and take when we see that a group of students might be below grade level in certain skills. We have an instinct to go and remediate those skills. But that risks the fact that we might have students that are unchallenged and uninterested, which can be an even bigger problem that spirals into disengagement and disinterest in school. Language can be a big barrier to equitable education. So we need to make sure that whether you're a social studies teacher, a science teacher, an English teacher, whatever, we are giving direct instruction of language, syntax, vocabulary. The classroom implications of Hefner's research again, she found that there was a positive correlation of increased numbers of text-based or frequency of text-based pedagogy, whereas there was actually an inverse correlation when it came to multimodal education, sort of experiential, lots of field trips kind of stuff. That doesn't mean that those things don't have their place, but what it does mean is that we have high expectations of all of our students, and as such, we need to give them every opportunity to to give them authentic looks at authentic materials. What it doesn't necessarily mean is we give them a bunch of articles and we ask them to answer dry questions. What it does mean is that we have them, like I said, this study was particular with social studies, but is equally as important in any of the other disciplines, that they have authentic texts that they can go to and analyze. That can include something like Socratic seminars. The big key here is it doesn't have to be dry, read this, answer this. One of the other really big things is we love our students. Well, I hope that you love your students. I love my students, but it's very important that we view this. If we, in light of what we've just learned, it's very easy to take a deficit mindset and say, well, these guys have it hard, so I'm not going to expect necessarily as much from them. You might not say that explicitly even, but you might accept inferior work. This is something that we need to guard against. It is vital that we keep the expectations high for every single one of our students. They have the ability to create quality work and quality learning. They just need various levels of scaffolding and support. Teacher expectations are hugely correlated with student outcomes, particularly with 10th grade teacher expectations being one of the most closely linked factors to student performance further on in life, college and career. So it's vitally important that we don't see the difficulties as limitations and that we are teaching and expecting the best of every single one of them.
All right, thank you, Tim. Let's move on to how teachers can support the socio-emotional and educational outcomes for all students, or learning outcomes for all students. So it's important to consider a few things. Growth mindset matters. So embedding the tenet of growth mindset into school culture and curriculum will support and empower our students. Growth mindset also will help students elevate their belief in their own abilities in combination with being fostered by teacher dispositions. And that refers to the belief that all students can be capable learners. The second element to discuss is student achievement outcomes are based on a multitude of factors. So among disparate students, there are many things that we need to consider. As previously mentioned in today's presentation, factors such as poverty, de facto segregation, and lack of resources do have devastating impacts among our students, as we're aware of. So as Dustin's research indicates, growth mindset is consistent among students across socioeconomic lines, no matter what their socioeconomic status is. So again, just really reinforcing the fact that despite that we may come from different backgrounds, if you have a fundamental belief in yourself, you may have limited resources, but that limiting factor is that fixed mindset. It's one important contributing factor that limits students' ability is a fixed mindset. So making room for growth mindset. And third, teacher dispositions that support positive student outcomes. So we must consider the importance of teachers modeling dispositions that embody culturally relevant teaching practices. So again, that's having the respect and offering dignity to all students in our classrooms based on the premise that they matter, that they all contribute value to our learning spaces. Teacher preparation programs and professional developments, and also reflective teaching practices from vested teachers should respect diversity in the classroom and display a positive viewpoint of all learners. Okay, so what we can take away from our research is that having a growth mindset sets students up for greater personal success because they're not limited to those fixed modes of thinking. Positive outcomes are observed among students of high and low socioeconomic status, and so that we know that adopting growth mindset is beneficial to all learners. Implications of Dustin's research demonstrate that a growth mindset is not exclusive to students of higher socioeconomic status, as previously stated, but both students of low and high socioeconomic status demonstrate ability for positive outcomes when applying growth mindset. Now that's to academic outcomes. Some concerns that the researchers had that I thought were valuable to share were considering students' access and ability to be able to reasonably achieve things. Now, growth mindset isn't the magic, golden ticket to success. It's just a contributing factor that can benefit students from a socio-emotional and psychological standpoint. But Destin and his researchers do bring up good points that at home, students who are benefiting a higher socioeconomic status have different access and different entry points to different parts of society and to the world, which might mean some students' parents might be college educated, they might be professionals and can afford to take them on college, college tours, and they get to have that entree and that experience. But we also must consider as teachers offering students of different socioeconomic and entry points, different socioeconomic strata and entry points. We need to give them entry into these worlds as well. So modeling, behaviors on how to be a self-advocate, that can be helpful, as well as bringing in different successful members from various elements of the community and that represent different neighborhoods, different communities, different socioeconomic status. That way, students do get a model that can support them into seeing levels of success. All right.
And so as Tiffany and Tim mentioned, we're giving you classroom implications, but we want you to know that it does extend the classroom as well. So if we are looking at, as Tiffany had just mentioned, what we can connect students with, not taking that deficit mindset, but connecting them with people within the community is ideal. If you are unable to connect them with people within the community, because as we know, if we have a community where 50% of our student population comes from a single parent household, their parents might not be able to interact with your classroom as much as you may need or provide mentoring to support the classroom in the way which you would like. There are people who are former students of your classroom that you can reach out to that are local members of clinics and communities and organizations around your school. If not, there are also plenty of people in organizations like HBCUs and other, like I have here, the California Hispanic Chambers of Commerce. There are people who want to partner with you, and if you tell them what your students need and you assign projects that are related to interactions with the community, that's that missing link we feel, where if you can apply those practices that Tim and Tiffany mentioned within your classroom, but then you can extend it to something that's meaningful outside of your classroom, we believe you will be much more successful in creating success for your students. Some of our further discussions, if you want to join us for future webinars, we want to look more about how to foster growth mindset in all students. We want to look at equity among educational resources and social economic status. We also want to look at how teacher dispositions vary among communities they serve. So for example, if you were a teacher who received a pink slip in the last couple of years and you get moved to a different school site, how do your dispositions vary? Should they vary? So we'll be talking about that. We're also going to talk about and do some more research on how to instill growth mindset without direct instruction. So what are some tools that you can use? And then we also want to research if we could disaggregate for social economic status and look at student groupings for using culturally relevant teaching, what would that look like? So we'll be excited to share what we're looking into for that as well. Just to sum up what we've covered so far today, and that we hope you take away back to your classroom, is that you are evaluating your personal dispositions, you are promoting growth mindset in all of your students, and using those culturally relevant elements in every day of your teaching within your district and within your school, that you are helping adopt academic literacy plans or elevating your academic literacy plans that you have. You're knowing and working alongside your community liaisons, whether that's the college and career advisor or the immigrant student center advisor, gear up and past mentors, or you're working as a community liaison yourself, taking on leadership roles. And then within the larger district and the community, you know, having these same conversations about, you know, what culture means within your community, what your union is voting on, you know, being an active member and knowing how you can foster these things with your students is extremely important. Getting out there within your community, going to Balboa Park, meeting other community members that are doing great things and finding ways to connect them with your students is really what we want to see. We have references here. We've shared our slideshow with you, so you can go back and review the research that we've shared with you here today. We sincerely thank you for your time. It's been a pleasure having you.
Have a nice day.
Thank you.